In the Army we get chow that you wouldn't feed a chow. Oh, the Navy gets the gravy, but the Army gets the beans. Beautiful beans, gorgeous beans.
What was that? I don't know, Sarge.
Hello and welcome to my Model Corner Project 38. In this World War II era model build, we center our attention on the B-25B Mitchell medium bomber, and we paint, detail, and add decals to adapt it as one of the aircraft to participate in the famed 1942 Doolittle Raid. When I purchased this kit, I expected I was going to have a relatively easy build with a relatively low parts count. And as you'll see, there were only a couple of fit issues and a couple of instruction errors. Despite this project was cursed. There were unforced errors on my part along with a plague of inexplicable incidents of bad luck. So grab your religious talisman of choice as we open this up and release a legion of demons.
The box. You opened it. We came.
Rather than start off with the cockpit, we'll begin with some of the larger and simpler components by cutting, sanding, and doing some initial assembly.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
There are some minor gaps, and we'll take care of them with some putty, then clean up after it dries using a cotton swab moistened with tap water. In the rush to get things constructed, the exhaust ports were added on, but it would have been better to attach them later as separate painted items, avoiding the need for future masking. On to more assembly with the tail section flight control surfaces. We'll also cut away the central fuselage for the painting palette, and we'll throw the vertical tails in as well. For later paint chipping and scratches effects tasking, metallic silver is laid down as a base for mimicking actual bare metal surfaces. As you'll see, there is the opportunity for a lot of extra work within the fuselage that may be deemed as unnecessary. For this project, a reasonable level of painting and detail work will be accomplished, but it's up to other modelers on how far they want to take it with their own builds. In any case, please follow along on this B-25B's journey as we fill in this fuselage. In order to continue, more of the internals need to be cut, painted, detailed, and finally affixed within the aircraft's structure. Another cardboard square is prepared with more of those pieces. The instructions call for the bomb bay to be silver aluminum in color, but some museum Mitchells have the zinc chromate color, which is what I would expect. I went back and forth on this, so I did not take great care initially in what color it was. I went from silver to zinc chromate, but then in the end deciding to go with the silver aluminum. Thus, you may see some of those parts' colors change over the course of this video. For the next step on these pieces, the green version of the zinc chromate is applied with my trusty airbrush. The seats do not have molded harnesses or lap belts, nor are photo etch parts provided, only basic decals to resemble the restraints, but since they'll barely be visible, we'll just slap them on. In particular, for the pilot's instrument panel, a decal with instrument faces is available. I applied some liquid mask to the glass style faces before painting to keep them transparent for later on so that the decal's instrument marking details could be visible once that is applied. Building the cockpit is one of the basic tasks of an aircraft model undertaking, and it's usually the very first step in any instruction set you'll get, but we took the long road to get here. Unfortunately, Academy forces us to install the nose landing gear early on, which subsequently risks the chance of breaking it off and limits freedom of movement during our forthcoming work. Also of note, it's an oddly engineered assemblage we've got here.
Well, there's something you don't see every day.
Taking our parts up another notch in detail, creating areas of chipped paint and detail wash for grunge and shadows are dressed in. Each bulkhead side opposite of the bomb bay compartment housed important crew stations, the navigator's area, and on the other, the radio man turret gunner's position. One thing to worry about is the various fuselage windows. We want them secure so they don't get pushed in and lost to rattle within after the fuselage is closed up, but not so much glue as to destroy our transparencies. For the exterior of the windows, we begin applying our kit-provided pre-cut masks to protect the glass from all the painting we're going to perform. And more installations. They only give us the lower 50 caliber turret base, which is correct as the guns in Bendix turret were removed for the raid on Japan. The fuselage halves are ready for mating, and we take a last look at all of our work going into the posterity of our mind's eye. The bombardier and nose gun compartment are treated as a separate assemblage in this kit to be added on afterwards. This is a tail-heavy airplane model. 30 grams of ballast is required to counteract this, but the space for it is a bit tight behind this bulkhead. Some cotton, masking tape, and some foam rubber are placed in appropriate areas for overspray protection, as we do. Yellow-green to simulate the yellower version of zinc chromate anti-corrosion paint is airbrushed on. This will help to create tonal variations on the bomber when the main color is applied, as well as wear effects such as paint flaking off, but not to the point where the bare metal is showing in various areas. On the right side of the central fuselage, olive drab was applied before the gray on the lower fuselage to create the two-tone appearance. Yet, on the left side, I applied the gray first. Why? Originally, I went with the usual feathered line between the two colors and it looked fine. But then I got it in my head that it was supposed to be a very distinct border. A camouflage putty was pressed on and then the airbrush was aimed in there real close. Of course, this was all wrong and all these lines had to be redone after all the decals and other detail work had been done. Difficult and unnecessary work had to be carried out to recover from this later on in the project.
Mother puss bucket.
And the error is revealed. Even though there is a decal to represent this warning line, a simple bit of masking can allow us to actually paint in the marker, which will look nicer. Some scratches and chipping are done here. The B-25s of Doolittle's Raiders had various degrees of wear as seen in footage taken as the bombers were ferried towards Japan. Some of the effort here was toned down after images revealed that this was a little overdone for my particular Doolittle B-25B tail number. Returning to the wings and the tail surfaces, we go about repeating the steps we accomplished for the exterior of the fuselage. A little masking of the engine firewall was taped on to protect the propeller shaft's ability to rotate at the base, and the black was added in case the back wall can be seen once the engines are installed. On the top of the screen, NATO black is applied for the anti-ice paneling and pre-shading, and on the bottom of the screen is afterwards with the anti-ice panels getting masked off. Let's build up our power plants. And while we're at it, let's also build up the landing gear. You'll probably note a continuity error with the nose gear as we already installed it with the cockpit and fuselage. The wash on the heat-dissipating fins of the pistons works very nicely here to bring out the detail with the shadowing, much like the TBD Devastator project.
Jimmy Doolittle and a little band of flyers carried the war home to them in a joint Navy-Air Force operation.
I've frequently been asked, what was the purpose and what was the effect of the first Tokyo raid? Well, the purpose was to take the war to Japan, to show them that their island was not inviolate. The effect? Well, the effect was to cause them to divert some of their military strength that was needed in the South Pacific to the protection of the home islands. The actual damaging effect was very little. Our airplanes were on the Hornet. We were intercepted just after daylight on the morning of April 18, 1942, by Japanese surface craft. We took off immediately, proceeded to target, and all but one of the planes carried on to the coast of China. We carried 1 ton of bombs in each one of 16 airplanes. We dropped 16 tons of bombs on 4 or 5 different targets. When you realize that from the Marianas in the later stages of the war, B-29s were carrying as much as 6,000 tons of bombs in one operation and dropping them on a single target, you realize how puny our effort was.
Vintage film footage and photos show that the Doolittle B-25 propellers did not have their tips painted with color, nor was there a manufacturer's logo on the blades, only the blade specification text. We'll keep it accurate by adding that text and omitting the logo decal and painted tips. But on your model, you may choose to include all that. Remember, it's your project, and you could paint peppermint stripes on it if you wish. Of course, some people may react with,
You're not from around here, are you?
A small length of tape is used as a guide to ensure that each of the decals are placed equidistant from the central hub on all blades on both propellers. Chipping is done with a sanding stick and more so on the leading edge of the blades, which is on the right side of each, as they spin counterclockwise if you're viewing the B-25 facing the nose. As always for me, it's important that the propeller drive shafts turn freely, and in turn, are propellers. But I played with fire and painted one of the wing undersides before adding in some protection to the engine faces and the spindles. I got away with it, but I was gambling to create another unforced problem. For the top screen now, we add the gray on the undersides of the main wings, in which the pre-shading of the black lines is pretty effective in creating a nice look. On the lower screen, we merely add the olive drab to the vertical tails. For the main wings on top, the olive drab is applied, and on the lower section of the screen, masking and painting of the engine nacelles is performed, but still with the error of generating a distinct line between the gray and the olive drab, which all has to be corrected later. Also, the line at the nacelle and wing interface in some places was a little off, so that all has to be touched up. At this point, it was time to catch the horizontal stabilizer assembly up to the rest of the aircraft model. Using a sanding stick, stiff brush, and a hobby knife, we scratch up the surface. And while we're at it, we'll hit the vertical tails. While the horizontal stabs, which looked nice initially, after the gloss coat was applied and the first pass of the light detail oil wash made it all the worse. Here's where we could have avoided the masking had we just painted and added the ports at this stage instead of gluing them in early on. On to the main wings for weathering and other details. I was pleased with the results on the look I was achieving, but the plane I ultimately chose to replicate actually was one of the aircraft that was in fairly good shape compared to some of the others as far as the exterior paint job holding up. So this scraping is a little too aggressive and had to be partially repainted over. Also, the protective gloss coat prior to the washes ended up wiping out most of the tonal variations of the olive drab and the yellow zinc chromate anyway. The tires for this model are molded as weighted wheels with a flat spot, which needs to be aligned with the deck once the model is completed.
The planes sweep in without being discovered. They separate into groups to attack the several objectives carefully selected by means of accurate intelligence to ensure that only targets of military value will be hit. Colonel Doolittle himself has told of flying over the Emperor's palace and refraining from bombing it, though he could have left it in ruins.
While we start on the decals, let's listen to a few pilots from the Doolittle Raid on Tokyo.
Our takeoff from the Hornet was made successfully. It wasn't as much the length of takeoff that bothered us, it was the width. It was about a 4-foot clearance between the right wingtip and the island, the left wingtip hanging over the deck on the left-hand side. Trip in was uneventful. My first target was a tank factory in the south of Tokyo. My alternative targets being an oil storage tank and a railroad yard. We were fortunate in getting through the anti-aircraft and reaching our #1 target. It dropped the entire load on this tank factory and had the satisfaction of seeing 2 of the bombs score direct hits.
We all feel pretty strongly about these boys that we were with. We had all been pretty close. Large family, almost like brothers. We'd known each other from a year to a year and a half before this raid ever came off. We knew their families, their children, and if there's any way to get even, we'll certainly try.
I found the decals somewhat difficult as they wanted to adhere to the surfaces very quickly even with extra water added to float and move them about. They also didn't hold up to the weathering steps well and could tear despite the decal solution application and long duration allowed for them to dry. I accordingly avoided putting any washes on the ensuing decals and dusted them with powders to create fading and wear later on.
Hi, Ted. What do you say, boy? How are you doing? Good to see you. Sure good to see you, too.
Meet Captain Ted Lawson and Captain Dean Davenport of the Army Air Corps. You may have heard something about a little flight they made last year. They were pilot and co-pilot in one of those B-25s which took off from the deck of the Hornet and delivered a basket of eggs to Tojo.
sure great to see you again, Ted. Get
Yeah,
together with you.
it's good to see you too, Dean. Say, did you ever get married when you came back here to the States?
No, not me, Dad.
I thought you were in that hospital in China. You were always saying when you first got back to the States you were going to get married first.
No, I was in China, Ted. Things are a little different here.
You're not fooling, they really are. I didn't think we'd ever make it.
Say, remember that crash we had out there on the beach, Ted?
That's no fooling.
Oh, that was a little rough. Never heard so much noise in my life.
No, it really was. Hasn't been so terribly long ago, though, really just a little over a year.
That's one trip I'll never forget, Ted.
And what's a bomber without its bombs? At last, we execute the risky improvement operation of feathering the line between our two main colors while trying to protect our decal work and other work from being affected. For our last decal, we'll add on the ruptured duck nose art. Some gray wash gets slapped on to begin, while avoiding the roundels and nose art to lighten the paint job and fill in some detail in the crevices, and a darker wash is used for the gray underside once again. Supplemental weathering powder of soot and rust colors are rubbed on to enhance the look of a used aircraft. Now the engine nacelles are tended to on that camouflage line. Weathering powder in the order of snow, rust, and soot colors is applied in this instance to create the look of exhaust residue buildup. There are no glass parts for the wing nav lights, so a chrome base is tapped on, then after that dries, the appropriate clear colors. We put our pre-cut transparency mask to the test on all the different clear parts with frames. These tape pieces fit nicely as not being a shade too big or too small. As long as you place them precisely, you'll get good results. The masking pieces are strong and the tackiness does not fade, so if one needs to be lifted off, it will secure once again with no problem. Some pieces have a small slit to slightly twist to curving window panes, and some panes require a two-piece mask combo to properly cover a respective zone. If you wish to install the 30 cal nose gun, you first need to drill a hole so that the barrel may slide through it. All the glass frames got a coat of NATO black, then olive drab. Speaking of the 30 cal, here it's put together and painted. Some small but important miscellaneous items are readied in these clips. All the big parts are ready to be assembled, but with the gloss coat, the darkness of the initial olive drab, and the wash, it doesn't look like much. Not all that good, in fact. We can only hope it turns around in the end. And we just have a couple seats to put in the nose section. This Bombardier's lower glass fit fine, but I couldn't capture it on video, so I had to finish it off camera. We'll add the cockpit and Bombardier's glass sections while still keeping the protective masks on. Starting with the vertical fins, we begin to lighten the olive drab using a different olive drab misted onto the surface. Academy actually suggests this lighter olive drab we're using now as the main color in their paints list for the Doolittle B-25s. We also then apply that lighter olive drab to the whole of the rest of the bomber. This also helps take out some of the excessive paint chipping and scratches to be more in line with Plane 7, the ruptured duck. The stanchion and antenna masts are pretty small and flimsy. Scratch building them with a stronger material is something to consider if you're planning to add the cabling. When I was about 8 years old, I first discovered Captain Ted Lawson's book, and it was the first time I read a first-hand account about the traumatic physical wounds of a World War II veteran and the toll to survive after they ditched their B-25. So that's why I picked the ruptured duck, tail 402261, all because of 30 seconds over Tokyo. We seal and protect everything while evening out the reflective properties of the model with a layer of flat clear on the underside. For the antenna cabling, we start with the easy part of the stanchion to the VHF antenna. Then a short piece from the fuselage to above the overhead window and to the central cable. Next is from the stanchion to the right vertical tail, finally, a cable is attached from the stanchion to the left vertical tail. Once again, we seal and protect, leveling out everything with a dull coat, this time on the top of the B-25. The mask and protections for all the glass pieces previously placed on the Mitchell can now be removed. To better support the model and prevent an accidental bump causing a nose-high position and a tail strike, a used paint bottle was placed below the tail to create a fourth point of foundation during these final stages. The putty that was protecting the silver of the landing lights chamber is also removed. Even though I had wax pencils, the landing light lenses were too smooth and curvy for the wax to get a grip, so my old method of tacky putty on a stick was employed to place each lens. More of the masking is removed, and note how strong they still are. You practically could reuse them. Propellers on. One final piece, and we're done. Take care, and we'll see you later. And boost pump 2 on. Start 2. Boost pump 1 on. Start 1.